wow, I wish I was there again. And although you would probably wish to be back in college someday when you're old like me, this should be like less difficult. It should be less tragic. It should be less filled with bullshit. So, as somebody who got to live through a bit more life with less heavy stuff, my love goes out to each one of you. So if you are at all needing somebody to talk to, we have fantastic GTAs. I love this department. I love the people that we work with. We are compassionate human beings first. So if anybody, needs anything, please reach out. We just got done talking about deviance, right? And I said the less of a connection we have, the more likely that people do deviant acts. And one of those pieces is inami, that feeling of alone, of hopelessness, of disconnection. And then you got this on top of it. So people been inside, just getting force fed, who knows what media or who knows what for a year, maybe just frustrated being inside. This person, although I'm not going to dignify their name or anything like that, their brother said this person was a loner. They weren't involved with people. They were super disconnected from society. I lectured about it not 2 weeks ago. And as far as that's why we need to involve people. That's why we need social programs and social safety nets and checking in with people and suicide prevention and all these good social nets and programs that people say cost too much money. Wait till it's your best friend or your kid. And then it's not too much money, is it? So we need these programs in place to make people feel connected and to check in on people and to form a sense of community, rather than get more and more and more separated. So I do feel like part of that is just this last year, not being able to really, feel as connected. And I think that that's the thing about people getting vaccinated and getting back to some a little bit more normal life, and people following through with that is making sure, and this is what you can do, make sure that the people in your life are connected, check in with them, and make sure that they know that you love them. This is a very, very, real thing. And and I just wanted to make sure that, um yeah, that is something that you're doing with your own friends. Secondly, or thirdly, we're not going to talk about it now, but we should talk about some kind of gun control. We should talk about a waiting time. We should talk about this. And for anybody that thinks I'm infringing or being really political, I'm not. Just go ahead and take a musket loaded ball gun, like a musket and powder in that, and you stand there and you load that. And then I'll have an AR-15, and then we'll talk about when that was written, when in the Constitution that was written, what kind of weapons we had, what it really looked like, and how nobody could ever take your weapons away from you. So let's start to do something that seems mindful about this. And you know what Julie and I said, Julie works at a grocery store. You can only imagine how intense this has been for my family, because people have been trying to start shit with her and get in the faces of her coworkers and terrorize her coworkers for the last year. The very people that help you get your food. And I know that I've mentioned this before. So yeah, let's try and get this on track. Let's look at sensible laws, and let's realize that no one's coming to take anybody's guns, but we can do something about it. Like we were just having lunch. I ordered Thai food. I went and picked it up. We got Cafe de Bangkok today. My house smells like Thai food. It's so delicious. And we're sitting there talking, and I'm like, do you know how pathetic it is that people got used to school shootings? That we got used to people killing kids on a regular basis at schools and doing nothing about it? Do you know how horrible you have to be anybody in our government and refuse to legislate or do anything about this as if we simply can't? How ridiculous is that? I know very conservative people that want to protect their communities, and I know very liberal people that want to protect their communities. This is not beyond us. And I think that your generation isn't like, oh, gun control. I think your generation is like, let's do something about this. Gender bias, let's do something about this, right? Mass shootings, let's do something about this. Like, you are the generation of, I'm not waiting on this for another 30 years. So, good luck with that. You've got people from my generation behind you, that, and working hard. So let's work hard, because we do this in sociology to make this a better community, right? And to embrace each other, to give a little bit of love, and realize that if there's a social problem that faces us, we can do something about it. Just because it's guns, oh, heavens me, I can't do anything about it. What? We have sent people to the moon. Do you know how amazing just an airplane is? And you're telling me we just got to all be able to run around with AR-15s. No, like, give me a break. Like, that's not a liberal or conservative thing. That's a very human thing. It's a social problem, and we can tackle it together. Excellent. So all the peace and positivity towards you in the world. Let's wrap up this stratification piece. And we're almost there. But I guess first, as we talk about, or last in this chapter, as we talk about a name that I don't know if it'll ever not be polarized or emotionally charged, and that's Marx. Look at him. So scary. All of that socialism in that beard. Anyway, we're going to talk about now stratification from a conflict perspective, right? Inequality is the result of conflict. There's the base, okay? And instead of being like from a functionalist perspective and suggesting that maybe we need, if I'm lagging, sorry about that. There's not even anybody else in that. Let me make sure my internet's off on the phone even. There's nobody else here today. This is the third day in a row I'm home alone. Do you know how incredible that is? I was just teaching a chapter on population yesterday, and I said, how many, now we knew like everybody's quarantined. People were talking about how many babies are going to be born 9 or 10 months later. What about now that parents are home alone for the first time in a year? I think we could look at some interesting data in another 9, 10 months from that too, as well. But as we get back here, conflict isn't going to say that it's necessary. Conflict is going to say, oh, inequality is only useful to some people. It's only useful to those people that make the rules that are on the top that it doesn't really impact. Environmental dangers, not if you've got enough money. Food insecurity, not if you're the people that run the show. So from this perspective, that inequality is purposeful, right? And the differences in resources, they serve the interests of some people while simultaneously purposefully harming others, okay? And this is where we get back to this values and beliefs. I mean, they tend to be ideological, right? And again, we keep looking at this power ideology and how do we convince people that poor people are deserving of being poor? How do we convince people that rich folks are deserving of their wealth? Well, from a conflict perspective, these ideological kind of values and beliefs, they're going to reflect the interests of the more powerful members in society. And that means if you're going to change this structure from a conflict perspective, you're absolutely going to have to deal with that inequality head on. You're not going to wait for that inequality just to phase itself out. What's the motivation? When a system supports, right, and that inequality that in their own interest while it harms other people, you're going to have to do something about that. So Marx talked about class conflict a long time ago. I do joke about people being like emotionally charged about him, but there are some people that think it's like the worst 4-letter word that you could say would be Marx. Maybe I'll just start replacing 4-letter words with that just to see if it's interchangeable in any way. But Marx has been talking about the struggle really between, and you've heard of this, right? The capitalists and the proletariats, you know, the bourgeoisie, the owners, and the working class folks. And if Karl Marx could still roll around in his grave, he probably would be, because we're looking at an even wider gap of inequality with even fewer people owning more resources, while even in a very affluent country, you actually have people dying because they don't have the simplest of healthcare or the most basic of needs covered. So social stratification to Marx is rooted in people's relationship to the means of production, right? And we don't talk about capitalism a lot in this class. A lot of times I just say, well, it's capitalism. It's the structure by which we're functioning in. It's not a given. Capitalism doesn't reflect our natural competitiveness. It's just the economic system that we've adopted and that we've used. So capitalists, people who own and operate factories and other businesses in pursuit of profit, and the proletariat, the working people who sell their labor for wages. Now again, sorry, drinking lots of water. You've heard of this before. And one of the things that was said is the proletariats have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. I mean, if that struggle is so very real, and if there's such a high percentage of people that are living from check to check or month to month, or that can't make that, it's up to, right, people in government to support that or not support that, or do some kind of change, or have some kind of like whatever. And so, right, in the form of now what would be considered socialism, we've got the government that has given out a few stimulus checks because they understand that people need to survive. Now, of course, they've done it begrudgingly. I don't even think that a single Republican this last time around voted for any of that business, or voted yes for it. So, you know, we engage the same people in government that said, no, we won't take that money. They're taking that money. Texas is taking $16 billion. The people that are red people or blue states or red folks or blue voters or conservative or GOP, those people are keeping those checks. Those checks are a form of socialism. They're a form of social safety nets to help people survive. And while we demonize this, and a lot of people don't think that that would be worthy, a lot of those people are the people at the upper end of the ladder. So, right, where's the transparency? How do we examine it? How do we make things more equal? Again, we talk about this piece, the experience of isolation and misery resulting from powerlessness, this piece of alienation. Workers get poorer and poorer. They have little control over what they make. They have little control over other aspects of their life. Yeah. You know, how do we get more power to the workers? How do we uplift people? You know, these people are necessary. Why do we continue to see such big gaps? And, you know, I have here, and this is not really to answer, but more sort of theoretically, or for you to think about, do you believe that a Marxist revolution by industrial workers could ever occur in our society? Why? Why not? What's that look like? What doesn't it? How do people in power keep that from happening? What can people that don't have a lot of power do to improve their working conditions? All right. And finally, or lastly, we look at this stratification and interaction. So social or interactionist theory, right? So we're now looking at the last piece of stratification. We did functionalists, some amount of stratification inequality is necessary, conflict, it's not necessary, and it benefits certain people. And now if we look up close, we'll look at how people interact. And as sociologists, we know that social standing, people's different statuses, their level in society, their level on the hierarchical piece, whatever that is, it affects people every day with social position and how they interact or don't. People, even though we don't have a caste system here, they do keep to their own social groups oftentimes. They don't have access to, you know, maybe interacting with people every day that are on a much different level than them on a social stratification level. And a lot of times it's like that. I think it's always been interesting being a musician, because I'll get paid to be like up in Aspen, we'll be doing like, you know, getting paid thousands of dollars to be paying really high paid, high priced, very fancy events for people whom I would not be interacting with in any other scenario unless I was there to play some music, you know, for like a room full of CEOs or whatever that might be. So interesting how different people at different jobs and different places in the ladder are able to or not interact with other folks, and how people do keep to their own groups. So we do look at something called conspicuous consumption that I talk about definitely in my environmental sociology class, and that's buying or using products with an eye to the statement that they make about social position. A car that has a certain symbol on it, that has a certain status to it, a computer or a phone, right? That has a certain status to it, clothes, you know, so the way we dress, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, transportation. Conspicuous consumption could be buying organic food. You know, if you don't know much about organics and you just are kind of in it because this is a movement, or it looks good, or I'm now eating good food, and you know, it does say something maybe about your status too, is there's a whole lot of people that, you know, can't begin to afford that necessarily. Drug use, and leisure, how people spend their leisure time. Wow, I get to teach a class next semester, the United States and drug use, or drugs and the United States culture. I get to teach a whole chapter about that, which I think is going to be absolutely fascinating. Not here though, so I'm sorry, not at CSU. But how does conspicuous consumption shape your life? So we're looking at individuals. How do individuals interplay on the social stratification model? You know, a lot of times we used to say you are what you eat, right? Gotten away from saying that maybe you are what you buy. But how does social stratification or your social position? So again, we're not looking at the big macro piece, right? We're looking up close and personal in your life. How does your social position or stratification affect the way you behave on a daily basis? You know, when you interact with people from different social classes or on different positions of the ladder, do you behave differently? Do you act differently? Are you more aware of yourself in certain situations because of the differences in class that you perceive? I just find this fascinating. And so lastly, like I said, we kind of wrap up with that up close and personal piece as far as like how we look at the individual. Okay. And my computer is, there we go. All right. Any questions? The question about the Food Matters paper. Yep, we'll talk about this at the end of class, not after. So yes, I will absolutely answer questions about that. All right, any questions about stratification? We're done with chapter 7, and we're going to move on to chapter 9. Now, let me head over to here. It looks like 51 people have chimed in. If you're looking for it, it's the dark orange folder that is actually in chapter 2 folder. I don't know why it's in chapter 2 folder. I was putting the questions in there this morning, and somehow maybe I dropped it in there. I was trying to get it out of chapter 2. It's not, but then you'll see those questions. So if you haven't gone over there to answer those questions yet, head over there and answer those questions. We are going to be moving into the chapter about race and ethnicity. So chapter 7, I'm not sure what chapter 8 is. I think we're skipping it. This is chapter 9. Any questions as we wrap up stratification? Anything? I'll take a break, I guess, since we're in between. Olivia, if you are around, even though I got a direct message from you, did you want to ask the question? I think it's valuable to ask the question for the class. We talk about the Food Matters paper. Did you want to?
I just wanted to see, like, for my idea, I was thinking about like doing food labeling from a marketing perspective and how that like affects the way people buy food. So I just wanted to see if that would be okay.
It would be, but it's a pretty big topic. So within food labeling, you could do the attempt to label foods genetically modified or not. You know, that's come up for voting in several of the last election cycles. Or you could look at it from an advertising perspective, I guess. But try and maybe find a part of that, you know, that is specific as you can. But yeah, I'm fine with labeling or food labeling or packaging in some sort. I think it'd be interesting to look actually at the movement away from food packaging, like into bulk stuff, you know, which was kind of starting to take a rise to reduce packaging, but with COVID, then all of that backed off again, you know. Anyway, I think there's some really interesting things out there. So yeah, that sounds good. Anybody else as far as the question?
Thank you.
About the paper?
I had a question about like what your expectations are for section 1, where we like choose the ingredients that we're researching, and then like what do you want us to say about them?
Yeah, so there's your list with the big list, the 10 different foods, but then you pick out 10 specific ingredients. And I would say, look them up in a couple different places. And if it's high fructose corn syrup, look in a couple different places through Google Scholar, not on the page 1 of Google. Find out a couple things about it, maybe even one fact. But if you cross-index and it says 2 different things, that's interesting. And then write a couple sentences about that food product. Riboflavin is used in blah, 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 blah. It is a preservative which keeps from anti-caking. They have also seen some links to food coloring or whatever it is, or red dye number 5 and cancer, you know, whatever, carcinogens or whatever that might be. So brief. I'm not asking you to write even a full paragraph, just really a couple sentences on some of the ingredients that you think are interesting. Yeah, I mean, why look up high fructose corn syrup anymore? Why not pick something that you can't pronounce? Or something that you think is interesting. And I said that that's not always insidious. You know, it might be just something like another name for, I don't know, potassium or something like that. But then also you get into the interesting thing, agents, anti-foaming agents, preserving agents, anti-caking things. And then you get into some really food colorings and dyes, flavorings. Interesting to me. So hopefully you can find 10 interesting ingredients and don't just do the same old, you know, annetto. And you know, annetto is a common natural food coloring. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that answers that. Not a lot for each one of those. Any other questions? Those are both really good questions about the paper. Any other questions? All right. No? Yes? No? All right. So let me go over here and gonna ask a few questions. Let's see today, what do we ask? And over here is, does race matter to you? How much does race matter to you? So does race matter to you? How many folks have we had? We've had 50 people in this, answer this. And interesting, we are split pretty much right down the middle. Yes, 22 people saying yes, 27 people saying no. Does race matter to you? And then if we go, how much does race matter to you? And we have a ton, some, not very much, not at all. I really should have had some and then not at all. Don't ask me why, because some and not very much are pretty much the same. So learn how to write a question, Jason. But still, a ton, 9 people, not at all, 12 people. Everybody else in the middle. Okay, so race matters a ton. Not at all for 12. And so I'll ask this question as we sort of get into this chapter, why or why not? Why does race matter to you a ton or not at all? And then I guess a reminder, I should say, I don't know. I kind of talk about race and gender and things like that throughout the whole semester. So remember, that this is about responsibility in our conversation here. I think, is with that in mind. Obviously, depending. And I used to walk around the room and I'd say, what does race matter to you? And I would pick people. And I would purposely pick lots of folks from dominant culture. And oftentimes, those folks say, I'm not sure, or not much, or nothing. And then I make sure to pick some folks that I perceive to be not in dominant culture. And oftentimes those answers are much, much different. So as we get into this chapter, a couple things. First of all, it's about responsibility. It's not about guilt. My dad the other day, who is 80 years old and watches some Fox News, which I try and get him not to, but he is 80 and he can watch what he wants, said to me, what do you think about reparations? And I said, wow. I said, are they arguing about this on Fox News? And he said, well, and I said, okay, so forget that for a second, Dad. What do I think about reparations? I think you'll never have to worry about that in your life. I think you're a musician. I think you live in a diverse community and you have taught diverse kids. And probably that many of those people have not had a good start in life or any kind of fair shake. So how would that hurt you? And he's like, okay, next question. So there are topics that people get really emotionally. We emotionally charge people hard about affirmative action and hard about reparations. People are just barely maybe beginning to see a tiny bit of reparations. And just maybe in this last week in a place in Illinois. And of course, everybody's got to lose it. College scholarships based on race alone, 0.025%. That is 1/4 of 1%. So when we talk about affirmative action, everybody loses their minds as long as we say that somebody's going to be doing brain surgery on you who doesn't deserve to be doing brain surgery on you, but we had to fill the position with a person who's a minority folks, right? So first of all, let's tighten this in to a discussion where we reflect the reality. There are inequalities. It's not about you owning slaves. It's about responsibility. And many of these issues are highly emotionalized on purpose to get people polarized on purpose so that we can maintain this one true thing over the last several hundred years of this country. This is race relations in this country in a nutshell in 200 years. Rich people convincing poor white people that they are just this much better than poor people of color. That's it. That's the whole thing. And you get those poor white folks to then discriminate against the poor people of color by giving them a job on the slave patrol, by letting them own a little bit of land when other people cannot. And so you reinforce that notion, and then they do it for you. Even though if we were to look at this, and now we're transitioning between stratification and race, so this is the perfect thing. Even if we were to look at this, who's in the same boat together? really wealthy people and poor white people? No, I'm sorry. That's not the same boat. That's not the same insurance. That's not the same life chances. That's not the same anything. The poor people who are struggling together with the same concerns and the same amount of money not in their bank, with the same no access to healthcare, those people, so much of our society, who white folks, people of European descent, Black folks, brown folks, Latino folks, those people are all in it together. While very few people continue to do the same piece, which is to try and make poor white folks feel a little bit better than poor people of color. Now, I will talk about this chapter, but that is a very basic, very true, and very repetitious lesson as we look at race relations over many hundreds of years, and of course, within the big context of life. So we enter this knowing that if I said, how much does race matter to you, or does race matter to you? If you're a person in dominant culture and you're like, here's privilege, okay? This is exactly the piece of privilege. Meaning, if you haven't had to think about the color of your skin and the repercussions of it every single day of your life, multiple times a day, before you get up in the morning as an African-American female, when you look in the mirror every morning and have to say to yourself, I am as good as other people, I am as strong as other people. Like when you are older, when your kids are leaving the house and they are children of color and you do not want them to be assassinated by police, so many ways that if you're a person in dominant culture, maybe you've had that unearned privilege or advantage of really not having to think about it. And that's nothing to feel guilty for. That is just the simplest way that I can explain white privilege. It's just that if you're not always having to think about it, it's not a burden and or an extra piece that you have to consider in the working of your life. Life's a bit easier, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have other things, lower on a socioeconomic status, disadvantaged gender, disability, or differing level of ability, whatever that might be, right? Just because you benefit like I do from white privilege, or if you do like I do, I most certainly do, doesn't mean that you're trying to take advantage of that. Doesn't mean that white privilege means that I'm sitting on a big pile of money like Scrooge McDuck. My whiteness affords me everything. It doesn't. But it certainly has some advantages. And those advantages, even if they're in the fact that I don't have to add that to my list of how life is tough for me every single day, what a tremendous advantage. What a fan. I mean, you're right. Like what an amazing component to not have to worry about. So we're going to try and look at things in this chapter from many different perspectives. So now that I've kind of talked about that, what do you think? How much does race matter to you? Or why does race matter? Or like a lot of times when we talk about gender, some people are like, it's him, he, his, whatever, it's her, it's, or I don't care, it doesn't matter to me. So there's a lot of reasons here. What do you think? Anybody willing to share today, even though I know energy-wise, we're slowing down. I love this chapter, and I love teaching this chapter because I think there's so much for us to learn. What do you think?
To me, it doesn't matter like a whole lot, but I think it does matter. And Professor Downing, I think you made a good point of like, if you are of dominant culture and you don't have to wake up every day and think about like, oh, I have this color skin, that's an advantage. And I think a lot of us take that for granted because there are people who don't look like us that have so many issues that they have to deal with. And I think it's important to recognize those and try to make them right.
Great. Reality. We recognize difference. It's tougher for some folks, so these are real basic kinds of things. Good. And I don't think that they're very extreme notions. I think that they're concepts in the way that you said it, Lindsay, that we can understand. Yeah, good. Who else? Race matters to you a lot, not at all. Why? Why not?
I think that race matters like a really good amount, not only for what has been said, like what you and Lindsay have been saying about like the negative consequences of race, because there are many, 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 as we have seen, but also just like for some people, race is like their main sense of community. Like for Black Americans, they don't have the documentation of their heritage and their history like other ethnic groups and races do. And so to like propose a kind of colorblind society like actually harms more than does any good, because not only does it erase all of the negative consequences that have come from it, but it erases all of the positive things that people associate with it now too.
Very well said. I don't really think I can I don't think I can add anything to that. Very well said. Good. It's a lot to think about with that piece. Yeah. Yep, that's a privilege. There's a privilege that I have that I just realized. My mom passed away in October. I went home. My grandfather was huge into family genealogy and keeping track of like family trees. And I've been looking through this giant bin of pictures going back several generations. It's really like incredible and mind blowing. A lot of folks have had, you know, a lot of that history wiped out and erased. And so if you can do that, if you can look at your family history just to begin with, yeah, that's a privilege. Great, great. Not great, but a good contribution and good thought. Anyone else? Why does race matter? Why does it not to you?
For me, race matters a lot. I'm adopted, and so both of my parents are white, and my two younger brothers are white, and I have an older brother who's Native American, and all four of us are adopted. And so like obviously like I grew up in a sense of like being exposed to different cultures, and like it was normal for me. Like I grew up with that, like, okay, when you see somebody who's this color skin, like that's just who they are. Like that's like the beauty that they contribute to the earth. And so like a few years ago, my parents, like for all of my brothers and I's birthdays, they got us like the DNA test, including themselves, so we could all figure out where we were from. And so for me, like it was always kind of just more of like, I don't know, like just the beauty, I guess, of the different cultures, specifically in my household, you know? And so it's like, I went to high school somewhere where it was predominantly people of color, which was my first exposure to like my Hispanic heritage, which was really like, it was a culture shock to me. And then like I come up here to like CSU, and obviously it's more predominantly white people. And so it's like, I don't know, I feel like I found myself like always thinking about race just because like the diversity was always like ingrained in me, that's normal, that's what it is on this planet, and that's like what it's going to be, is people of different colors coming together.
It, I don't like my students are, people need to listen to your generation more. that's what crosses my mind, Lewis, with what you just said, is just simply, that's a reality. Are you going to change that reality? You can't. We are getting more diverse. Like there's a lot of beauty in the world. And I guess a lot of times I feel like, yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. And thank you because of this. I grew up in a town in Illinois that was kind of 60-40, which was very diverse. White folks, African-American folks just outside of Chicago, not suburb, but 2 hours outside, Freeport, which is kind of, you know, now it's always been struggled with poverty, and but it was always so very diverse. I moved to Colorado 20 years ago. It was a big shock for me from where I grew up, and I find myself missing that awesome thing about Freeport, that is just like black folks and white folks are just used to each other. It's not really all that weird. And I miss those people in my life that aren't maybe in Colorado as much. But yeah, that's a very basic point. We tend to think about race in such a stressed out negative way that we're missing that whole beauty piece. We're missing the part about the inevitability of like why fight diversity? I guess I never really understood the concept before, because so much to learn. And so much to gain from other cultures, and not in a cheesy way. Just like, if you don't know these things, there's so many wonderful, amazing things that you can add to your life by experiencing this. So yeah, fantastic. And wow, very interesting across the board. Yeah, schooling tends to be so different from place to place as well. Okay, great. Anybody else? Why race matters? How much it matters to you?
I was I hope my internet doesn't crash during this.
Good.
I don't know what's going on with the router. So I put like it matters somewhat to me, but like more than just like some. Like I am Asian American, but I'm like white passing, you know, that I look very pale because I don't go outside. And then I guess I never really had any connection to, other Asian Americans or any Asian American communities. Oh, am I frozen?
No, you're
Can
good.
you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Everything froze for a second. Like my Japanese family didn't want me because I was, um, like part white and like part Japanese, and they only want like the full Japanese, so I never got any sort of communication with them. And then my grandmother, who's full Japanese, died of a stroke when I was a kid, and then she was also a terrible. um, yeah, so I never really had any connection like that, and we were always moving around anyway.
Right.
So I guess I feel like that part of me is missing in some way, that I'll never be able to really fully connect to other Asian Americans.
Well, the good news is you're very young, and there's a lot of time to do that. Realistically anyway, or hopefully. Fantastic. Okay, good. Anybody else? All right. So describe what comes to mind when you hear the word race in a few words. Skin color, racism, people of different backgrounds, terrible social construct, politics. A term associated with negative things should not be as prominent as it currently is. Competition of apples, talking about individual skin color. Someone's genetic identity also influences their opportunity. Cars going fast. All right, race, there we go. Color, social construct. Someone's skin color, the skin color you're born with puts you in a certain place in society. People of color being separated from white color. Culture of someone's skin, physical look, skin color, ethnicity, different people's biological backgrounds, colored people, diversity, inequalities, racism, divided between people, differences of people, different ethnicities, physical characteristics, familiar background, discrimination. Skin color still has a lot of negativity. Human category, good. What someone looks like, where they're from, or race, the country I'm from, what color skin you have. Lately, race makes me think of violence because of all the atrocities that are happening. Color, unfair. Skin color, politics. Social concept uses a tool in the capitalist system. The color and appearance of a person, different colors, unfair for anyone who isn't white, unequal. Color of someone's skin, too complicated. Color of your skin, people being treated differently, inequality, black and white. Okay, what an interesting list. Any observations here? Describe what comes to mind when you hear the word race. There's definitely some repeated patterns and some things that are different, or some things, excuse me, that we can pull out of there. And certainly we're going to be talking this chapter about the difference between race and ethnicity, right? So I'm asking the question on race. Race and ethnicity, it's almost like it's used like we say drugs and alcohol, right? Like we say it because we want to say it means the same thing, but it doesn't, right? In a way. And drugs and alcohol, they are the same thing. We just use it to give alcohol kind of like get away with it kind of status or whatever. But race and ethnicity, two different things. We'll look at that here. Is our choice to cast a vote for a particular candidate purely a personal decision? What's it look like if we look at racial breakups of it? This would be percentage of people who voted for Barack Obama in 2012. Women and men, non-Hispanic whites, Hispanic Americans, African Americans. It's interesting because we can look at these numbers and yet the very day after the election, people are like, oh, solved it, no problems now, right? When in fact, race does matter quite a bit. All right, who are these two individuals? I love these two individuals. They're very important human beings. And so I'm just gonna wait for a second to see if one of them they're both heroes. They both fight for freedom. They both fight for racial justice and equality. They both look at historical contexts and perspectives. You should read and listen to more of these two individuals. There you go. That's a pretty strong statement. But in the 30-some people that are here, does anybody know who they are? I should play some like Jeopardy music, but you can play that music in your head. Anybody? Anyone? Nobody? Now, I love Star Wars and The Mandalorian, but if we know who Pedro Pascal is, but we don't know who these two people are, there's a problem. All right, on top, Dr. Brother Cornel West. Okay, Dr. West, ferocious freedom fighter, intellectual. I can't remember now whether I think he was somewhere else and then went back to Harvard, but currently Harvard wasn't going to tenure him or give him tenure, even though he's been like tenured at Yale or Stanford or other, I can't remember, but not only a figure of the civil rights movement then, but acknowledging the fact that we're not done with the civil rights movement. We have to know that. If we thought the civil rights movement happened a long time ago, it's not. That's not it. It's not. We're not done, and we're not done until things are more equal institutionally. And Brother West has a lot to say about that. He's a very positive guy. So look him up. He's on Facebook, and he's does all sorts of podcasts, and they're always asking him questions, and an interesting guy. And down below, you should know, because this is Howard Zinn. This is the guy who wrote A People's History of the United States. And if you want, so right now, Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. If you want a complete book that looks at, from like a very broad perspective and taking race into consideration and inequality and what really happened in history and how and why, you should read A People's History of the United States. Howard Zinn, also a very prominent sociologist. Yeah. So how much does race matter to you? Describe what comes to mind when you hear the word race in a few words. Now, if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. All right, every semester, and I may have alluded to this or talked about this before, those people in the middle would be the students posting the racist picture of themselves in blackface saying Wakanda forever. This happened either last semester or last year, maybe fall, before COVID, or maybe right after, I'm not sure. And then they interviewed the student that was responsible for it. Anyway, somebody always messes it up here on campus. It happens all the time. Parents in a group of people getting a tour called police on some a couple Native American gentlemen a couple years ago, made national news. If you Google CSU and race, or CSU and race relations, or CSU and blackface, it will come up with semester after semester after semester of people behaving like subhumans. And that is, it's not, I'll tell you what it is. This campus, like many campuses, need to really, really, really support students of color. And they do not fully yet. And you'll get another email. Somebody will put another news, or this happens, and you get another email and another email and another email assuring you that we support you. We support all of our students of color. But here's what happened. And this is the real big tragedy, is that last year in the spring, right before spring break, a group of students and teachers and people of color, and you name it, got together and said, you will meet us, Joyce, on this date, and we are going to talk about this, and this is what we are demanding. And it was all based around equaling things, recognizing students of color, making things safer for students. It was awesome. And they're like, you will meet here. And then it was right after spring break when it was supposed to go down, and that's when everybody stayed home. And as a social movement, and as somebody who was so very excited about that, I will look to find that document. And what I don't know is if the school ever met with those folks, if people ever followed up on that, or if we just went into like emergency mode with COVID and dealing with that, and now this has been pushed back. So you could do some research, I'll do some research and see if I can find that. It was a really impressive long document of demands and of reality, and it was powerful, and it was students. And if you want to feel powerful on your campus, you have a voice. You have that voice, particularly when it's something so important, I think, as just no more talk, okay? Let's really do it for our students. And we're not doing it for our students of color. You're doing it for everybody on campus when you make campus more equal. That's it right there. It's a very basic. So Black Lives Matter, a waiting room for colored only, just, a whole bunch of historical images. The Blue Lives Matter, I would say that flag and that image has been co-opted by white supremacists and racists. It's concerning to me. I have reached out to the Fort Collins Police Department on several occasions and talked with people and said, hey, you should take those flag stickers off of your vehicles and understand that if you want to police a community and have that community think that you're behind them, you probably don't want to be flying the flag of something that's been co-opted by white supremacists into meaning something very different. And this Blue Lives Matter thing was not the blue line flag. That was not a historical piece. I've heard that it is. People have said that it is. It is not. The Blue Lives Matter movement came out shortly after Black Lives Matter movement in what could be like really just characterized in a basic way as a racist sort of reactionary type piece. So to say the least, here we are in 2021, and we are trying to make things better. When we look at race, from a sociological perspective, we want to know what can we do about it, right? What can we do to make things better? And not like nobody's looking at race from a sociological perspective and saying, what can we do to hurt white folks? What can we do today to make them feel bad about themselves? That's not being done. What can we do to level a very unequal, statistically, numerically, research-wise playing field so that we follow through with our promise? That's basic. If we didn't promise justice for everybody and equality, then we then fine. In Russia right now, I guarantee you that's not a problem. I mean, it's a problem, but the people on the sports teams are all going to be the same general color and background. The people in the government are going to be that way. It is not a place that accepts or embraces diversity. And since we are that place, that's why you do something about it, because we've said that we were gonna, and we haven't fully yet. So work, action, responsibility. What are race and ethnicity? How are they created? These are social constructs. These are not things that are a given. We created and socially created the concept of race, meaning Europeans. So not we, people in Europe a long time ago. We'll talk about that. Why does the United States have so much racial and ethnic diversity? How are race and ethnicity important dimensions of social inequality? Who are disadvantaged and who are dominant? That's right, 150. Woo, safe, sliding into home. So I would love to go on and on and on, and trust me, we will. I think this sets up a fantastic conversation. I encourage all of my students to share what they can to make this a substantive chapter that gets us in this class, in 3 or 4 class periods, farther with a better solid idea of how to make solutions for and how to interact with each other more compassionately and more respectfully than our government could do in the last 200 years. So I do promise big things for this class because I've seen it time and time and time again. And that is because my young folks that I work with, we don't have as much habit. You don't have as much habit energy, momentum as other folks do. So we can learn to see gender differently. We can learn to see race differently and things like that. Create more equality. Anyway, be good people, do good things, mask up, stay safe. And again, it is absolutely not me saying I love you and then just email me and hoping that you don't. I love you. I think you're valuable human beings. If you ever are struggling, reach out to me. Past this semester, if you're struggling and you think I'm like an ally for you or somebody that you could, handle, like for those people that just don't like me, they're just gonna go online and like destroy me and move on. But for those people that feel like I might be an ally, I am. So you can reach out past this semester, whatever that might be. All right, take care of yourselves. Peace, everybody. Have a good one.